Right, so now I've talked to you guys a little bit about snakes, geckos and iguanians, I thought I would show you some of the other reptiles that we have here. And I thought I would start with these little guys here. Now, these are Peter's banded skinks, and they're a type of lizard. Now, you get lots of different kinds of skinks, and skinks differ from other lizards by having very smooth scales most of the time, and they're normally quite small. Peter's banded skinks are an African species of skink, and they come from North Africa. Now you can see as they're moving through my hands, they're relatively slippery actually, and they're quite quick little things. Now these skinks are terrestrial, but more than that, they're also what we call subterranean or fossorial. And the terms subterranean or fossorial basically just indicate that these guys partially live underground. So if you think of fossils as being something that you guys find underground, so like dinosaur fossils, that's how I remember the word fossorial, and subterranean is basically sub, below the terrain, so below ground. And you'll see in their enclosure, their substrate is this beautiful soft sand, and as soon as I put them down, they will actually bury into this sand, and they spend a lot of their time underground, and that's generally where they feel safe. Now, one of the characteristics of skinks like these that helps them to bury themselves so well is their really smooth overlapping scales. They're relatively slippery, not slimy, but their scales are very, very well polished, and that allows them to move through the sand quite easily. Now, they don't swim through the sand like some other skinks, such as sandfish, which get their name because, just like fish, they essentially swim through the sand. These guys can't move quite in that way, but they are very, very good at being able to just burrow under the sand very, very quickly. Now, if you look carefully as well, you'll be able to see that these guys have a flap of scales over their ears. So their ears are exactly where you'd expect them to be, so just behind the jaw, behind the eyes, and you'll just be able to see from there these what look like gills, essentially. Now, they're not gills at all, that is their ear, and it's just covered by this scaly flap. Now, the reason they have that is because when they bury themselves underground, obviously they run the risk of being able to get foreign bodies in their ear canals, so things like soil or sand. So by having their ears mostly covered with scales, that blocks off that ear canal and stops them from getting too much sand in there. So yeah, that is our Peter's banded skinks. Alright, so next up is this little dude, and he's so small I'll probably have to hold him in front of the camera for most of it because you probably won't really see him here, only my big head. Now, this guy is a slowworm. Slowworms, although they look like snakes, are in fact a form of legless lizard. And one of the giveaway features of slowworms that helps you to be able to tell the difference between them and a snake is that slowworms, unlike snakes, are capable of blinking. So if you ever see a snake blink, it's not a snake, it's a lizard. And if you see it in the UK, it's probably one of these guys, which is a slowworm, which are also native to the UK and most of Western Europe. Now, these guys are fantastic little lizards, and they're really a gardener's friend. So if you see them in the UK, please don't be scared of them. They're actually great at eating slugs, snails, all the kind of things that would normally destroy your garden. Now, these guys are only babies at the minute, which is why they're so small. When they're fully grown, they typically get about 1.5 to 2 foot long. They're completely harmless to people, so they are a lizard, completely harmless, not venomous, and they're great to have around. Really cool little lizards. Now, slowworms, unlike snakes, but like many other lizards, are able to break off their tails in a process called caudal autotomy. And the tail of slowworms, unlike snakes that typically will have a very short tail, is actually quite long in slowworms. So the tail on these guys starts roughly here, so about 1/2 to 2/3 of the way down the body. So if this guy was to get a fright and lose his tail, it would almost be like he's broken in half. Next up we have another skink species, but this one, as you can see, is quite a lot bigger than the Peter's banded skinks I showed you earlier. This skink here is a blue-tongued skink, and to be specific, it's an eastern blue-tongued skink from the east coast of Australia. Now, these skinks in the wild, they range right from the south in the states of Victoria, right up to the Northern Territory, right at the top of Australia. So they've got quite a wide range, and they're very hardy, durable lizards. Now this girl, just like Peter's banded skinks and just like the vast majority of skinks, has very, very smooth, shiny, overlapping scales. However, unlike most skinks, if you were to x-ray this girl, you would see that underneath all of these scales on her back is a tiny fragment of bone, and that is what we call an osteoderm. Now, it's a small bit of bone under the scales that basically acts to give them further rigidity and therefore gives this lizard added defence. Now, one of the other features shared by nearly all skinks is that they have very, very reduced limbs. They don't lose them completely like a slowworm would or like snakes do, for example, but you can see on this girl, considering how large she actually is, she's got very, very tiny legs. Both the front and the back legs are relatively small. Now, for her that isn't much of a problem because she just moves along the ground, she doesn't need to climb anything, and actually the movement of her body in addition to those short legs is more than enough to help her move around and search for her prey, which in the wild for the most part is very slow moving invertebrates like slugs, snails, that kind of thing. These guys are called blue-tongued skinks for a reason, there we go, and if you're lucky enough to see it, you will notice that, just like her name says, she has got a blue tongue. Now, one of the reasons they are hypothesised to have a blue tongue is mainly for defence, and that's because this tongue is very, very large. In fact, it's about the same size as the whole of her head, which, as you can see, is pretty large. So in the wild, if she ever got scared by a predator that she thought was going to eat her, what they can do is rock back on their front legs, open their mouth as wide as they can, and stick out that bright blue tongue. And it's hypothesised that this works as a startle tactic to make the animal look a lot bigger and just to scare off a potential predator. One of the other features of blue-tongued skinks that I think makes them pretty cool in the lizard world is that they actually give birth to live young. So when they reproduce, unlike most lizards that would lay eggs, these guys are what we can call ovoviviparous. And what that means is they retain the eggs inside them until those eggs are ready to hatch, and then they literally give birth to live young as they hatch out the eggs. Now, these eggs don't look the same as, say, a bird's egg because due to the female keeping those eggs within her, she doesn't need to put a calcium shell on because they don't need any protection. So that is a unique trait amongst these guys. Now, normally, animals that lay eggs are called ovoparous, so egg laying. Animals like mammals that give birth to live young are normally called viviparous, so live bearing. But because these guys essentially merge the two, so they do have eggs, they just retain them inside their bodies, that's why they are called ovoviviparous. They're kind of between the two. So there we go, Australian blue-tongued skink, one of my favourite of all lizards. Alright, so next up here I have a couple of European-eyed lizards. Now, these lizards are the largest lizard in mainland Europe, and you can find them in the Iberian Peninsula, so Spain and Portugal, as well as in Mediterranean France. They're quite sexually dimorphic, so you can see even as I hold them here between the face, that the female is quite a lot smaller than the male, and these ones are both the exact same age. Now, the males can get about 2 or even 3 times the size of the female, and they're generally a lot bigger built and also more brightly coloured. Now, these European-eyed lizards are omnivorous, so as well as eating insects, they'll also eat small mammals as well if they can find them, or the young of mice, anything like that, and also a little bit of vegetation as well. So they've got quite a varied diet compared to most lizards. Now, these guys are quite fast. I'm surprised they haven't actually tried to get away from me yet. Now, one of the brilliant things about these lizards is, although we keep them inside in a heated vivarium, they're one of the few species of lizards that you can actually keep outside in the UK. And in fact, I have a pet European-eyed lizard at home, which I keep outside in the garden. Alright, so this is our last species of lizard that we have here at the animal unit, and it's also the biggest. This here is a bosque monitor lizard. Monitor lizards are a group of usually very large, muscular lizards. The largest lizard alive today is in fact the Komodo dragon, which is basically just the biggest species of monitor lizard there is. Just to show you how big a group monitor lizards are, it's not only the Komodo dragon, which is the largest species of lizard in the world and that is a monitor, but the second, third and fourth largest species of lizard in the world are all monitor lizards, so it's a very large group. Now this chap has a very good sense of smell, just like all other monitors, and you can see the constant flicking out of that tongue using that Jacobson's organ, that Vomero nasal organ, to be able to taste and smell the air. This one here has actually had a bit of a bad shed, so you can see all of the retained skin stuck on it. So in a minute, in order to get rid of that old dead skin, I'm going to give it a bath, and that will help to hydrate the skin, loosen up any dead skin, and then that will be able to fall off so she's more comfortable. Now I've showed you all of our snake species and all of our lizard species, it's time for me to show you the very last group of reptiles that we keep here, and that is turtles and tortoises, or chelonia as they're otherwise known. Now chelonia, so turtles and tortoises, belong to the order Testudines. Now if you remember when I had the blue-tongued skink out, I was telling you a little bit about osteoderms, those little bony protrusions that they have under their scales to give them defence. Now if you think of turtles as having osteoderms taken to the extreme, that is essentially what their shell is. So their shell is basically osteoderms that have gone to the extreme, that have fused and formed a massive shell that also fuses internally with their rib cage. Now on top, the top of the shell is what's known as a carapace, while the bottom of the shell is the plastron. Now in Britain we typically divide chelonia into 3 groups according to the habitat that they occupy. So turtles we typically think of as marine, completely aquatic organisms like sea turtles. Then you have tortoises, which live on land, so they're completely terrestrial. And then you have terrapins, and terrapins are typically the turtles that are semi-aquatic, so they're not quite a tortoise and they're not quite like a sea turtle, but they spend about half of their time in water and the other half on land. And these here are ornate wood turtles, which come from Central America, and they are a semi-aquatic, essentially a terrapin-like species. Now yeah, these are ornate wood turtles, and we keep these guys inside. In a minute I'll show you our tortoise species, which have their own specially built enclosure outside. But ornate wood turtles are very small turtles that, yeah, come from Central America. So basically the gap that bridges North and South America. Now ornate wood turtles, unlike the tortoises we have, are omnivorous. So as well as eating vegetation, they absolutely love invertebrates, particularly worms. They go crazy for mealworms and earthworms. But yeah, all in all, they're really cool little guys, and you know what? They can move surprisingly fast when they want to. Now, chelonia, so turtles and tortoises, are only very distantly related to squamata, which is the order that contains snakes and lizards. So although they're all reptiles, turtles and tortoises are very different. Alright, and here are our tortoises. So we have 2 different species here. One who is a little bit inactive at the minute, a little bit camera shy, and the other one here who is munching away at some lovely dandelions. Alright, so here we have an African leopard tortoise and an African spurred tortoise, both of which come from the same overlapping range in tropical sub-Saharan Africa. Now both of these guys actually live together, but that might have to change as this dude here gets a little bit older, because even though he's a little bit smaller than our leopard tortoise at the minute, in the end he will get much larger. So African spurred tortoises are the 3rd largest species of tortoise in the world. This leopard tortoise here is 13 kilos. At the minute he's roughly about 6 kilograms, but when he's fully grown he could push 40, maybe even 50 kilos. He'll be very large, certainly much larger than our leopard tortoise here. Now both of these species of tortoise are herbivorous, as is being demonstrated by this dude here, so they eat a wide variety of vegetation. Now the reason that I'm outside is these guys actually don't live in either of our exotics rooms. They have their own outdoor enclosure, which is essentially a specialised shed which is fully heated to keep them nice and warm, because again, remember I said they come from sub-Saharan Africa, they're a tropical species, they need a lot of heat, so they get all of that heat provided for them in this shed enclosure. And then they also have an outdoor part of their enclosure where they can come and enjoy the grass, fresh dandelions, and bask in the British sunshine when the weather is warm enough. Now today it's been nice and warm, it's been about 22 degrees, and certainly in the sun with that direct heat on them, they can reach temperatures of up to 30 degrees in this lovely weather. So it's nice and warm for them. Like all reptiles, they're ectothermic, so they're cold-blooded, so it's vitally important that they have that heat. And because most of the year they can't get it from the British weather, that's why they have a specially heated indoor part of their enclosure. Alright, so here we are back in their indoor enclosure. It's really warm in here. In fact, it's a little too warm for me even to be wearing this jumper, to be honest with you. Alright, so there's their water bowl. There's a little bit of leftover salad from earlier. This dude might be about to go back and have a little bit more of that, who knows. And then if I show you how warm it is under their basking spot at the minute, it is 37.4 degrees, 37.5 degrees Celsius. So pretty warm, and it's relatively humid in here as well. So nice and warm for these guys, a little bit too warm for me.